Okay, guys. I want to go over this. It's been a little bit week or so now that I posted. I'm sure nobody's really watched yet, but for the future, I wanted to clarify a little bit more about Redux because it is Redux in itself isn't necessarily complicated idea, but it's not simple, I guess. Like React itself, I would say, isn't too hard. But the React with Redux, combining those together, is a lot of a learning curve. So I found this post by Esther Falahi about setting up a Redux project with Create React app. Okay, so we've already gone over this, but just to review what's going on here, we do a npm install this Create React app, which actually put it on there. We needed Node first, remember. From there, we create our project. In this case, he's calling it Redux-CRA for Create React app. Or you can use npx right here instead. npx is like new as of npm version 5.2 and above. Change directories, run, and we should get this normal welcome that we've gotten before. So here's our folder structure. Okay, this is a very beginning where everything comes through, and we have source here, we have public there, our app.js, index.js, which, if you remember, looks quite a bit like this at the beginning. We have our public. This gives us our root. And then from there we had our source folder. Same thing here. And we had this index.js that basically renders everything afterwards. We got rid of that app.js and we moved it over to our components folder. So it's right here instead. So from there, note, for your project to build, the following files must exist with the exact file names. So these files we didn't move, we didn't want to change them. That's index.html and the index.js. Remember this index.js and this index.html. The reason for that is, as they say, I thought he said it in here. That's okay. Not too worried about it. The reason for that is, where is it at? I don't do the Create React app tons. It basically does it for you, so I don't really need to go into here. But there should be like a webpack somewhere right here. And this has a package.json. Which contains all of our stuff, but there should also be let's search, start. Not there. It's basically somewhere inside the Create React app. It tells it, and I thought it used to be inside the right here. It is right here, so it's just a little different. Script start, so whenever we say npm start, it does this React script start, which should then be somewhere in here, possibly under R. But either way, this tells it to run. First off, let me minimize that. It tells it first that we're using this index.html inside of a public folder, and then secondly, it tells it to use this index.js as the entry point to our app inside of the source folder, and that's why we can't move these, and that's why they have to be named precisely as they are. So if you don't want to do that, get familiar with Webpack. Create React app works really well, and even installing stuff, you don't have to worry about it too much. So anyways, let's scroll back up. Redux Setup. So they suggest Redux, React Redux, and Redux Thunk. Sorry. Redux Thunk is a middleware that allows you to write action creators that return a function. The return function receives two store methods, dispatch and get state, as parameters. If you're still unsure about the purpose of Redux Thunk, you can read Dan Abramov's reference to it here. We won't read too much into that, but basically it's a middleware so we can pass functions in through the store or action creators. So let's do that. First off, run command prompt. Let's change over resume site, and then npm install forgive me, I don't do this dash save as afterwards. Redux thunk save, and that'll get us the middleware for it. It's not necessarily Redux itself, and that is why we're installing it separately here. And even React Redux itself is independent, if you remember. So it doesn't have to deal with just React, but this React Redux that we install gives us the functions to connect the two. Okay. So actions and action creators. Totally different entities. An action must have a type key. The type indicates the type of action being performed. Action creators are functions that create actions. They simply return actions. Redux Thunk allows you to write them as functions that return a function. So it's a callback. So our action creators will be defined in our actions folder. Name it action creators, whatever you want, but we're naming it actions. I believe we already have an actions folder with our index.js that we haven't done anything with. Now, before we get too far, I want to make a note. I was thinking about this, and our project does not really requires a peer, but none is installed. You must install peer dependencies yourself. Yeah, I'm not going to worry about that. If we run into an issue, we can install it later. So, if we remember npm start, we'll wait a second. So, inside of the actions folder, they created this file called simpleaction.js. And they're doing this a little bit differently, so let's go ahead and copy this over and let's show you. Paste. Notice it's really not much different than what we have. In fact, it's basically the same. The difference is it has this dispatch in front of it. So that's basically our difference. So this is our function that calls a function, or returns a function, I should say, which is this dispatch. And notice it's a little bit different. So inside of here, we have our, so first, here's our ECMAScript 6 arrow function. That's going to call another arrow function with a parameter of dispatch. And then because of that, our brackets go there. And then we're going to say dispatch right here. That's going to close there and close that. But if you notice, it's not too much different if you compare the two. We still have a type, and then we have whatever we're going off of. In this case, it's the index, right? So we don't really need this one. And again, our project doesn't really need to use Redux for what we're doing. When we're rotating our projects, just thinking about this, there's no need for us to use Redux here to hold our state in a different part, because when we go to our about, our projects, our links, our contact, nothing else really needs to have a state except for our projects folder. So we will use Redux in one of our projects a little bit more deeply, which we did use it here in this to-do list, which was just mostly a copy-paste of code from a tutorial, but it got us a little bit of the gist of what Redux does. And projects is really the only one we need for our state handling. So there's no reason for us to have Redux here. Just doesn't really make sense. Anyways, going on. Reducers. So these describe how the application state changes with respect to actions dispatched to the Redux store. So create a reducer folder inside source and define reducers for your app actions. Okay, so they have a reducers folder, simple reducer.js. Let's go ahead and copy this, and let's see how close we came. So that should be inside reducers. Remember, index just basically deport or exports them all. Let's go ahead at the end, paste that all. Export defaults, and then state and action. We got projects, which we export default projects here. Didn't necessarily need to do that. We could have exported up top. State and action. Okay. From there, we have a switch, and this is in order to do which type it is, which action type. And then we return. So it looks basically the same, right? They did an object here, we did an array, and then action is itself separate. I think we're okay leaving it as an array, but just to conform to this new one, let's go ahead and leave it as an object. It won't really matter other than our state could technically be something a little different. So there we have our reducers, pretty easy. And then using combine reducers utility from Redux, you can combine all reducers in the app into a single index reducer. We'll reference this index reducer as root reducer in your reducers folder, create rootreducer.js, and import all reducers defined for your app actions. So this should be our index.js inside of our reducers. I'm going to go ahead and copy. So they did a couple imports. So we didn't have a simple reducer, we had a projects, and then we imported combined reducers, and then we just exported the combined reducers. Looks exactly the same as what we did before, right? Perfect. And then our Redux store. The Redux store does the following. Okay, so this holds the state of the application and allows access to state via getState, and the getState method returns the current state tree of our app, and allows state to be updated via dispatch action. The dispatch method dispatches an action, consequently triggering a state change, right? So this is how we update our store. And then registers listeners via subscribe listener. The subscribe listener adds a change listener, similar to Flux's change listener methods, handles unregistering of listeners via the function returned by subscribe listener. So let's read this note. A Redux application needs only one store, right? So in our source folder, we want to create a store.js file and configure the Redux store. I don't believe we actually have one. So it should be inside of our source, but not inside of those. Store.js. Right, source/store.js. And we're sending no initial state, okay? I'll get into that in just a second. So very first thing, we need to import create store and this apply middleware, and the reason for this is the Redux thunk right here, is that apply middleware. Other than that, we could have just done create store from Redux, and then thunk from Redux thunk, and then we need our root reducer from root reducers root reducer, and if you remember, that's our combined. Where is this? Because I just copied and pasted this, right? Import root reducers from our reducers root reducer right here. They called the folder the file root reducer. Alright. So if we wanted to conform a little bit better to what they have, we're just gonna call it reducers. So back over to our store. Index.js. So again, we're importing root reducer right here from our reducers. So let's just call it root reducer. Same thing as they did here. We're going to go ahead and rename. So instead of index.js, we're going to rename this to root reducer. That way we just have a little bit easier of a time later on, because like I said, again, we imported it here, and then we need, instead of just that /root reducer, we're not really using it, but this is where we would import it, right? Anyways, root reducer, and then we go back down, which means that we would be inside of our store, root reducer from /root reducer. There we have it. Our create store or export default function configure store, my bad, returns this create store, passing in the root reducer and this apply middleware. So again, this root reducer, all it does is it combines all of our reducers together. So if I did put another one in here, it would be the comma and then whichever the name of the next reducer is. Again, looking at this because we only have one, so I'm going to leave it here for our purposes of learning, but we're not going to really use it. So if we want an initial state, okay, this creates it without an initial state. If we want an initial state, we would send in inside of this configure store, see how it says right here, this initial state equals an object. So if we wanted, we would put that inside of store right here. And we could have, you know, something like index 1, comma, other state, something like that if we really wanted, right? That way it would be our default, like something like if we had a logged in, has a default state of false. That way we could check it and we'd know that nobody's logged in, because as soon as you get to an application or to your website, you shouldn't automatically be logged in, or say someone's logged in, they need to log in first. So our state would be logged in false. We don't need that for our website, so we'll leave it here. Again, initial state, this right here. We'll leave it there just for a reminder in case we ever need to set an initial state, but we don't need an initial state. And again, this is the apply middleware from here, func. Okay, provide store. The Redux store is all set up, but the application has no access to it yet, right? Right, because we ourselves haven't even done that. So this handled using the provider. So React binding from React Redux to make the store available to every component in the app. It makes sense to call this binding in the app's entry point. So that's the index.js. So this is the provider store equals configure store. Notice how we're importing this configure store from that store.js. So that means we need to come here. So instead of this create store, we would actually import store from /store. And then the last part is this right here. Let's go ahead and check it out, right? So, oh, sorry, my bad. Configure store is what it's called. And we can tell because we export default function called configure store. So back here, configure store. And the store equals configure store. Now, did they do it in the brackets? Yes, they did. Configure store, just like that. There we have it. That gives us our app, closes the provider, tells it to put it onto the element by ID of root. They have this register service worker afterwards. Notice we don't have it, but if we Create store is not defined. No undef. Did I save? Well, of course, there's a few that I haven't saved. Index.js, line 8. We did it right here. We don't need that anymore, right? Because again, we're doing it in this store.js right here. This root reducer saying create store. So we just moved it a little bit. We had it here. And there we have it. Everything still works fine and dandy, right? So again, the difference was, instead of what we were doing, we were creating this store right here inside of our index.js, and we were sending in the store right here. So if we wanted to do the middleware thing, we could have right here too. But this way we know exactly where our store is handled. We're taking it out of our index.js and putting it in its own file called store. And all it's doing is sending the state and everything else registered with it. Now, let's look at this register service worker. React register service worker. Stack Overflow. Let's see what we get. I accidentally opened this. I was wondering, what is the purpose of register service worker in the following code? Well, let's find out. It's a web API that helps you cache your assets in other files so that when the user is offline or on slow network, he or she can still see results on the screen. As such, it helps you build a better user experience. That's what you should know about service workers for now. It's all about adding offline capabilities to your site. Okay, so we could look a little bit deeper. This is on the Mozilla. Download, install, activate. Other use case ideas, interfaces, specifications. I would suggest reading this, but I do not want to read it with you at this point. But I would suggest searching for what that does, right? So let's go ahead and just add it in. Because again, it's nothing bad, and we don't necessarily need it, but it helps us for that offline purposes for a better user experience. So might as well try and create a better user experience. So next, connect React component to store. Right. So this will be done using the connect React binding from the React Redux. So inside of our app.js is where they're putting this. Notice they imported this connect from React Redux. And they didn't change much of the initial code. They're just setting things up. So that's the original image source, class name, header. To get started, etc., right? But down here at the bottom, export default connect app. So they're actually saying to connect it. Well, let's see if we have that, huh? Because our app is still here. Notice that we haven't connected it because we haven't needed to. But this is where we want to connect it. So import connect from React Redux. right? And then at the bottom, export default connect app. So instead of export default here, we're going to get rid of that. That way it's class app extends. And then we're going to put it just like that. So connect takes in two parameters, map state to props and map dispatch to props, okay? So at this point we've set everything up to work. If you remember, let's go back a little bit. We created our reducer right here. We exported it. We have this root reducer which combines all of our reducers. We have our actions, which we changed this to use thunk instead, basically. So it basically, oh, and I'm sorry, I forgot to change this. So I'm just going to go ahead and copy paste, rotate forward. Really nothing was different other than just forward instead of backward. Again, we're adding that thunk here, so it's a callback that basically sends this dispatch right here for the action, and we'll see that used in just a little bit. From here, that was our actions. We had our reducers. We created this store here to basically create our store, right? And we pass it in right here inside of our provider, which again, provider has to go on the top layer in order to connect everything with the Redux to the React. So that's why it's the top layer. It basically gives the state to all its children. From there, we added this register service worker for better offline experience, and then the last thing we've done so far is connect with this React Redux connect, right? So here we are back here. So these will be discussed in a bit. For now, let's import an action to test. So import simple action from our action/simple action. They're importing this inside of the app.js. Again, we don't really need to import anything, but let's go ahead and do it anyways. Because of how we wrote this, I'm exporting two different actions. Rotate forward, rotate backwards. I need to say rotate forward, comma, rotate backward from dot slash. And I'm sorry, because of where we're at, it's inside components, right? Actually need to go up one, and then go to our actions. And then because it's index, we don't need to say index afterwards. From actions slash, because you know it's an index. So we got that so far, right? We imported the map Redux state to component props. Allows React component to subscribe to Redux state updates. So basically it's so that the component itself can have the state that it needs. So we would do something like this, right? Let's go ahead and copy it, And the reason why I'm copying, I know copying isn't really all that great because it doesn't help you learn sometimes, is because we don't necessarily need it here. Now, if you think about this, we don't really need this in our app unless we were using the same thing for our navbar to main, to hold a state that would be here, and when you click navbar it would change that state and then come back up top and then change something inside of main itself, like one of the states inside main. So it would be like a sibling component that it's changing a state for instead. Then yeah, we'd want this here. But you know, we don't really need this here. If we were gonna truly do this, this would probably be inside of our projects right here. Notice I wrote it before, right? And I was just messing around with it a little bit, but there it is. That's where we'd want to write it, is inside of our projects, not inside of our app, because our projects is really the only one that needs it. So we don't need that import here either. Save that before I mess it up. And this is the one we're working on, so I'm going to go ahead and close all the other tabs. Notice I already imported. Now they're doing this a little bit differently. Rotate forward, rotate backward from our actions. Notice how before I deleted this code, I said index, dispatch, rotate forward, index, etc., right? Well, because we're using thunk, I don't need to say dispatch here anymore. That is because we said dispatch right here. So map dispatch function to component props. So map dispatch to props. So we map the state to props. Sorry, actually I'm curious. I did say mapped. My bad. My bad, if you caught that before. This, I was writing map dispatch. We haven't gotten there yet. We just literally we put the state over into here, just in case we wanted the state in our projects. If we wanted to use it here, we would use the state here. Again, we don't need it inside of this app because we're not using the state anywhere besides right here for the project. So that's our state. And then we do the dispatch to props. So I'll go ahead and copy. Here we go. That looks a little bit cleaner. My bad. I am not the best React Redux person either. It's some of this stuff gets complicated, and I don't use it enough to really be super familiar with every little thing. That's why I'm not just writing it, I'm also showing you basically things I've found that tell you how to do this as well. It's really a good thing for you to be able to do this, because even if you don't know, like, how do I make an Angular app? Okay, we got all of these, right? And then there's more pages, tons of pages 48,500,000 results. Well, we have an ad here, coherentsolutions.com. There's this angular.io, which is in itself, without even knowing for sure, this should be the actual official documentation for Angular. Learn how to create your first Angular app in 20 minutes. Seems like it's pretty good. Angular application from W3 schools. Starting an Angular app with the Angular CLI. Angular JavaScript tutorial by building a Gmail clone. So there's all of these, and I couldn't tell you which one's better than the others, but typically you want your documentation, and usually they'll have some type of tutorial here, introduction, application, etc., right? So if we really wanted to get into Angular itself, we need to know how to search for this and how to read what this is saying, right? We don't want to just copy and paste code, because if we copy and paste, you never really learn, and there is tons of code out there. You're not going to know everything, but you need to know how to find your answers, I should be saying, not necessarily just a mindless drone. You need to be able to think for yourself. Think, okay, what do I need? Well, if I want to build an application in Angular, I should probably read this tutorial first, tell us about it, and then the application shell seems, pretty good. Install Angular, create a new application, serve the application, stuff like that, right? I can find there. I can read that, I can read this, and basically we need to know enough to know what we're doing, right? Enough just to be dangerous, and then from there have fun. So anyways, here we go, back to map dispatch to props. Notice the equals dispatch, simple action, dispatch right here. Did I copy this? If not, I copied it again. I did. So this looks exactly like I had before, right? Map dispatch to props equals dispatch arrow function. So again, that's like the parameter. Arrow functions, you don't need parentheses around one parameter. And then what we're dispatching are our actions, more or less. In this case, I have an index parameter, and I'm dispatching into here. The original idea of this was I was going to use the index, just like here I'm using an index for the state. I would just actually map this back over to our projects producer right here, this index, and do everything there instead. In a lot of ways that's better, because then our projects component becomes a little bit more of a pure component, where it's not doing, we're following more of like an MVC pattern, model view controller pattern, right? So these components here should just be views. They hold a state which may change things, but they don't actually mutate anything on themselves. And that's the whole point of having a reducer instead, is so that this can be changed on something different. It can be changed in the controller, and based off of the state, which is like the model, more or less, right? And then the view can literally just display the view. So we could do that. We definitely could. I guess I never really saw a reason for it. We'd more or less change where the state comes down to, and change this dot state dot index from the props component. Map state to props, map dispatch to props, both of them are props. But again, we don't really need it for this one. Anyways, moving on. Let's go ahead and get rid of this. Import it there. We have prop types, we map state to props. Then we update connect function parameter. So if we remember, we said export default connect, and it can have two things. So we need this here, and then this gets gone. After everything, export default connect, and this would be, I called it projects, right? Projects right there. Let's see if everything's still running. Of course it's not. Unexpected token. So we missed something, didn't we? It's probably this right here. Because remember, this is inside of our app.js. Do I have that? I do not. We had it inside of here. There we go. What do we get now? Probably some more errors still. Line 9 instead. Basically, it still doesn't like this map dispatch to props. So again, this is where we need to know what we're doing a little bit, and we're just dangerous enough, and then we search for the issue. So what have we not done? And it could be, again, just so you're aware, could be something we haven't done yet. But see right here, test app. So we should be basically done. We mapped it to there. Simple action, update connect function parameter, which is what we were trying to do. Next thing is test app. Merges the action creators and store updates to the components props. Okay. Function with the dispatch parameter. The function should return an object that uses dispatch to bind action creators. Alternatively, you can use the bind action creators helper from Redux. Anywho, I think we imported properly. Doesn't like line 9, which is map dispatch to props. So let's copy this over. See if I did anything wrong. We'll go ahead and actually just say rotate forward, index, dispatch, rotate forward, passing the index. Let's make sure I didn't mess that up. 2 parentheses at the end, yep. And then we're going to do a comma, rotate backward, index, arrow function, dispatch, rotate backward, index right there. Let's go ahead and get rid of this one. Should still be line 9, and still doesn't like us. Could it be because it shouldn't be because of these? But we do have a constructor. Let's do it after the constructor. Bleh. Shouldn't be a difference, but nope, see, it just changes the line. We'll copy that. Interestingly enough, when I did that, nope, okay. I was hoping that there was an invisible, maybe there still is. I was hoping there was like some invisible space or character that was breaking it. I'm getting an unexpected token error when I run the code. I'm sure it is a syntax error or something, but I cannot see it. It occurs at the return on the map state to props function. Kindly, any help? Appreciate it. Again, blah 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 blah. Right here. So he's done it outside of his class. And maybe that is what's happening. There's a missing div in your code, probably the one that closes the div ID wrapper. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. Good catch, guys. Good catch, Merso Carlin. But looking at that, I think our issue is we need this. Not inside here at all. We want it right there, maybe? Let's see what happens. Register service worker is not defined. Another search. Why was service worker merged in create React app? That doesn't help us, right? Now undefined. How to make your existing React app progressive in 10 minutes. let's just get rid of that part and see what we get here. See, they say it right here too, register service worker. I think that's the one we already went to. It's just on here twice. Let's go all the way back to the top where he says register service worker, and as far as I understand, ours didn't ever have that in the first place, and they're saying that it should have came default with that inside the code. Apply middleware, register service worker. React and React DOM. This might be the line of code we don't have. Because we just say render there instead. Notice how they have React DOM.render, and maybe, nope, that should definitely be here. Render. .render. Semicolon at the end. Let's see what happens if we do that, huh? Still doesn't like us. I might search for this. Search for the keywords. I was hoping that would let us click on it. It looks like it lets us, but it doesn't do anything. Huh. So for now, let's get rid of this line of code. See what happens. Line 14. Oh. Sorry, I could have sworn I got rid of it. I guess I just got rid of the space between it. That should come. Connect is not defined. That's in our app.js. Well, of course it's not. See what we get now, huh? There we go. It's all still working. Notice we're not using it. We're not displaying it. I'd have to send the props over from this projects. And we'd want to, instead of having our components from this default props here, we would put them as our props inside of the store, like, yeah, basically the store. But we really don't need to do any of that. Like, it's whatever. The way we have it works. But if we did want to use this, prop types is components, prop types.any, default props right here. And then see, we use these components from the this.props. So our components is inside of our props. and we would put it inside of our state as a default state instead, with an index of 0 to start, and then we'd rotate that index from here. So this is how we would set it up if we really wanted to. The reason it's still not working is I'm not calling this rotate forward or rotate backward anywhere, right? And let's get to that. Test app. Now let's test that the store is connected and all works. Yep, create a function that will be called when the button is clicked. So basically, they created a button inside app.js for test Redux action. Create a function that will be called when the button is clicked. So simple action equals event this.props.simpleAction. Bind function to buttons on click. On click equals this.simpleAction, this right here, right? It's passing this event in there. On click. Add a pre-tag so you can view changes in component props. JSON.stringify this.props, right? And this is just so you can see what's happening. Basically what we would do instead, because I already have it bound here, I would just call this.props. Rotate forward or rotate backwards. So instead of this here, I would extrapolate this out, and we'd say this.props.rotate forward. And I believe ours passes an index, which would be like this.state.index, like that instead. And then from there again, that would send our actions, rotate forward and index, right? So it sends that index over. And basically I'd add 1 or -1. Again, I'd have to do a little bit more than this in order to do the actual calculations. And I would do that. This should just send it over. And it goes over to here, this root reducer, which goes to projects, looks at the case, rotate forward. And instead of just returning this index, action.index plus 1, I would actually do everything I needed to do. However, let's keep that. We'll go ahead and comment that out. Uncomment that. Make sure everything still works. Since I already have it set up this way, we don't really need to do it. Now, the last thing I wanted to do, hopefully, is React Router. Okay. And this is basically what we want, something like this, to say our router and then the route path for whichever path sends it the component. So in Redux, we still need provider though. So very first thing, installing React Router. So let's go ahead and copy this. Well, let's just write it, no big deal. We'll close out of that for now. npm install save react router-dom. Notice, you guys, this time we did save before and the other time we did save after. I don't think it actually matters now that I'm seeing both of them. Both worked. So if you're using Create React App, you won't need to configure a fallback URL. It is automatically done. Yay for Create React App, right? If you're serving your index, and what they mean by that is right now, like if our project's not running, so that's not going to happen. But see how I have like /links or whatever up here? What would happen is if we did something and then / booga booga whatever, it would give us back to a default spot. Okay. If you're serving your index.html from Express, we're not really using Express. Configuring Webpack Dev Server. If you're using index.html from Webpack Dev Server, you can add to your webpack.config.dev.js. We don't need to do this because, we're using Create React App. Anyways, connecting React Router with Redux App. So we need to import router and route from React Router. And so here's how we do it. Let's go ahead and put that over there and this here. We're doing it inside the app. Import browser router as router, route from React Router DOM. Check. In a React app, usually you would wrap route and router so that when the URL changes, router will match a branch of its routes and render their configured components. That's a mouthful, huh? So notice this is a little bit different. We'll wrap router in provider so that the route handlers can get access to the store while we're inside of provider, so that's fine. Sorry, just reading a little bit. Our Redux app will still need provider. Provider is the higher order component provided by React Redux that lets you bind Redux to React. I'm hoping this is super quick, you guys. I don't want to make this really long for us. We can go ahead and restart. So we have that here. See, they're doing it inside of here, an app or whatever. We don't want it there, we want it here. So it's still inside of that render, but before the return. So const root equals store Okay, you guys, import provider from React Redux. We'll wrap router and provider. Component slash root.js. We don't really want it there again. So provider, router, root.prop types, export default root. We're looking at this and kind of making it our own again, so it's more so grab what you need without messing other things up. We're exporting the default. See, they're exporting root. We don't need that. So let's undo everything we've done so far in this. Other than that, we're going to leave that. And then right here is where we're going to create a router. Close the router. And there we have a route path. Oops, if I can type, equals slash. We don't need that filter on ours. Component equals app. We're inside of our app. Instead, component equals about. Speaking of, though, before we get too far, let's make sure we're doing this in the right spot, because I don't think we are. We're doing main right here. So it's inside main that we want to do this, which is inside of our container. This has our index from components, projects, I was messing around with a few things. We don't need this. I was considering doing Redux on it, but we have React Router for a reason. So we need to first import browser router as router, route from React Router DOM. Now I spelled all of that correctly, right? Import browser router as router route from Perfect. Okay. We don't really need a constructor. We're just doing a render. And then right here we have router. Close that router. Route path equals slash int equals our about component. See, we got this star as components from component slash index. About in projects right now, right? Before I do that, I'm going to come back to that code, so don't worry, I'm just looking back at it a little bit. Components.about. I want to make sure because of this right there. We need to say components.about. We're going to close that one. Route path equals slash projects equals components dot capitalized. Perfect. Close that. We don't need any of this. So they're saying refactor index.js to this, but we should be okay. Let's see what we get. A router may have only one child element. Ooh. So we're missing a few things. And this is getting a little too long, guys. So we will do it in a little bit. If you want to look at this, do it on your own. redux.js.org/advanced/usage with React routers. And I just googled right here, right? Redux React router. It's the second one that comes up, not GitHub. We could look at a few others later. Maybe look at this one from Jamie Barton. We'll see. But for now, that's where we're going to end it. So I will see you next time.